Jake Tapper is on the tail end of his book tour for Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and his disastrous choice to run again. He co-authored that book with Alex Thompson. I discussed it with him and played it on the show. Even if you haven't read the book, I know you know that it chronicles Joe Biden's decline and key decisions around the 2024 election. So I wanted to have Jake on again, and he was gracious to come on again, not to talk about the exact details of the book that is out there, and I commend you to many interviews he's done or the book itself. But I wanted to ask some questions prompted by the book and questions about media, questions in the ether, things that I've been thinking a lot about. So thanks for doing this, Jake.
Sure, of course. My pleasure. You did a great interview with me and Alex in Seattle, and it's always good to talk to you. Yes,
same here. But I wanted to start with, I don't know if you want to call it minutia, definitely the tangible auto pens. So first of all, it's legal to use. They're legal to use. It's as legal for a president to put his signature on a proclamation with an auto pen as it is to use a typewriter to write the words on the proclamation. So that's not in dispute, right?
No, it's legal. It's been legal. I think the Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department said during the Bush years, George W. Bush years, that it was perfectly fine to do so. What is being alleged, and we should note, this is not in our book. We did not find evidence of this, which is not to say that it happened or it didn't happen, but we did not find evidence of it, and we tried to be very demanding of what we put in the book. They are saying that basically there was just a bunch of people who just did whatever they wanted to do and used the auto pen to circumvent President Biden when it came to pardons, especially. And Alex and I found no evidence of that at all when we were writing the book. But that is what they're having these hearings about. I mean, they didn't ask me for advice as to what they should be looking for, but I mean, I think that what we uncovered is shocking enough. I don't think you have to come up with some sort of convoluted, well, this pardon isn't real or that pardon isn't real, because I don't know that they're going to find that, but what we found was shocking enough.
Right. So this brings me to the specific, and then I want to generalize it out. In general, they're using this as a way to get to the question of compos mentis. But I don't understand how that question, as applied to the auto pen, is different from every question of compos mentis if he was of his right mind. I understand that the auto pen is a tangible item, and I understand that Donald Trump is very good at knowing that people focus on tangible items like big pallets of money with the Iran deal, which wasn't necessarily true, or two dolls in dealing with tariffs. So I get that he uses it for rhetorical reasons. But do you understand better than I do why they're focusing on the auto pen as opposed to other things in your book or other things that Republicans could be investigating and focusing on?
Well, there are two different investigations. One is the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they have interviewed some of Biden's aides, and they seem to be focused more on the compos mentis piece of this. Not that this is just from watching and reading about it. I haven't talked to people on either one of the committees. The other one is the Oversight Committee, James Comer. Comer has a history when it comes to the Biden family, ever since becoming chairman of the Oversight Committee, of aiming high. Let's put it that way. Of setting a goal and aiming for that. And I think Biden crime family was part of that during Biden's years. And he promised a lot that he didn't ultimately deliver, which was he promised that he would find evidence that Joe Biden himself had profited inappropriately from various business dealings. And that's not how investigations are done. Investigations are done by finding out what you do know and can prove. And you don't overpromise.
Right. And it's also called building a case.
Right. Not
starting from a thesis.
You're not a sculptor, you're a sculptor, right? And with a big thing, a slab of marble. And look, I think it's unquestionable that Hunter Biden and Jimmy Biden and other members of the Biden family profited from their proximity to then Vice President Biden. I think that's unquestionable. But he didn't set the stage that was the goal. He set the stage that they were going to find evidence that Joe Biden himself profited and there would be impeachment hearings, et cetera, and that didn't happen because he didn't ultimately convince House Republicans that he had made the case. And it is possible, if past his prologue, that is what he is doing again. I don't know. Maybe he will find evidence. I don't know how you're going to find evidence of. I mean, I just don't think they're going to find somebody saying, yes, he didn't know what he was signing, and we did the auto pen, and he had no idea. Now, is it possible that he didn't know the name of every single one of the, let's just make up a number and say 300 people that he pardoned?
There were 40,000 pardons, including the marijuana pardons.
Right. So I'm just saying,
it might be pardons and commutations. Yeah.
Yeah, but of course he didn't. Right. Yeah. I mean, of course and neither did that happen with President Biden with President Trump or with President Obama, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know maybe they'll find something. I don't know. But I mean, I think that they are shooting high once again.
So at the risk of turning you into a political pundit here, just be an analyst. Does this mean that the Comer investigation, if past his prologue and he's conducting it like he did the Biden crime family, quote unquote, investigation, isn't working out as that committee wants it to work out? Or is there evidence that it is?
I don't know what's going on behind closed doors. I haven't seen any evidence of what they're getting in witness interviews. I have no idea. Maybe he will. I mean, look, he has subpoena power. I don't. So maybe, yes. People that talk to me and Alex for the book were not under threat of perjury. So I have no idea what to get. Look, as somebody interested in transparency, I hope he finds out a lot more. I mean, that's my hope.
That's exactly where I'm hitting at this from. As someone interested in transparency, I'm wondering if there's evidence that this kind of committee is the proper mechanism for identifying the problem and getting at solutions? Or is it more an exercise in stirring up dust and dirt?
I mean, look, they have subpoena power. They have smart staffers that work on the committee. They have smart members of Congress on the Oversight Committee. I'm sure that it is possible that they could find stuff out. But at the end of the day, you're only as good as your sources. And I don't know that the most damning stuff in the book, some of it we have attributed to individuals. Some of it you can guess who our sources are. Some of it is sourced on background, but I don't know that any of it's criminal. I mean, I think the point is they're trying to find evidence of illegality. And the book we wrote does not allege illegality. The book we wrote alleges, a disaster and a cover-up and something that was shocking and horrible, and that our country should never have to go through again. But so it's almost like that old joke about the guy under the street light looking for his keys. And, the person joins him. I'll just do the short version. It's not a funny joke anyway, but the short version is, like, he's only looking under that light for his key. He lost his keys actually over there. He's looking under here because the light's so much better. I mean, it's like, okay, we need to find evidence of a crime. Therefore, this is where we're going to look, instead of, well, let's just look into what happened with President Biden and find out where it takes us.
So obviously I read your book, and there were elements of it about how involved Hunter Biden was in a non-criminal way in his father's decision-making, and it was just very troubling. Let me just say that. But I want to know, this isn't necessarily why you wrote the book, but the uncovering of facts in the book led to, so far as you could see, what tangible changes in the real world?
I think there is an acceptance. I think if anything, it was Overton window. I think there's an acceptance that Joe Biden should not have run for reelection, and that he was in no way equipped to run in 2024 or be president through 2029. I think that is kind of just established fact.
Okay, so if there was an open question before the book was written, that question is now much much more closed.
Yeah, and I would say that there are
Okay.
questions for people who were close to Biden about what they saw and when they saw it that have yet to be answered that I don't think they're going to be able to. Like, for instance, if Kamala Harris runs for governor or runs for president, I think she's going to face questions on that in a much more aggressive way. Same with Pete Buttigieg, same with other people who worked in the Biden administration. So I think that's it. There was, I have seen other influences that we have had. There is a city councilwoman who came out and basically said that our delegate here in Washington, D.C., Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is a trailblazer and a legend, but also I think she's 89 years old, not allowed to drive anymore. There are questions about whether she should be in Congress, whether she should be running for reelection. And there's a city councilwoman who referred to our book and said, I don't think she should. And then there is I'm not going to take credit for this one, but there is a congresswoman, the only Democratic official who I saw who not only called for Biden to not run for reelection, but said he should step down as president. And that is one of the most interesting members of Congress that there is, a woman named Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. She's from Washington State. She's in a swing district. And she, in the Appropriations Committee a week or two ago, tried to introduce an amendment that would allow a path for, if members of Congress are addled, where there's a procedure where somebody could report that to like the Board of Ethics or whatever. And it was shot down by voice vote because neither Democrats nor Republicans want that out there. They want to be able to be in Congress until they kick the bucket. But I do think that I'd like to think that we played a part in at least the conversation.
Yeah. I saw that. I put that in the gist list. I saw the Axios article. Did your co-author Alex write that article? I'm trying to remember.
I don't think so, but I know he's interested in it too.
Yeah. So maybe one of the reasons that he didn't is you guys have been on this huge book tour and you hit a lot of left media, whatever unbiased media there is. You hit a lot of right media. You hit right-leaning media if they've bifurcated into two camps of, I don't know, roughly we need more clamoring on the Epstein investigation, or we agree with Trump that the Epstein investigation was always bullshit. What I'm saying is, if you were a botanist and you came back with a soil sample from all of these different genomes, what would you would be able to construct some sort of biome. What's it like out there? What did you learn from the book tour that was surprising?
That we're even more siloed. And by we, I mean the American people, are even more siloed than I thought we were, where people on the left have no idea that Alex and I have been attacked on the right. People on the right have no idea that people on the left have attacked. I mean, like just complete different universe, completely different universes. Also, I would say that misinformation, disinformation, bad journalism is just thriving. It's just like I've never seen before. I mean, I think that that's just a part and parcel of the democratization of the media, but it's weird. I'll tell you what's weird. It's weird to see. So Hunter Biden made up some crazy story about me that it really has absolutely nothing to do with anything other than the fact that he doesn't like me, I guess, whatever. And he, it's not even really worth going into the story, except to say it's not true. But all of a sudden, all these right-wing outlets that have only quoted Hunter Biden to attack him for a decade.
The one thing you need to know about Hunter Biden is he's totally incredible and the apotheosis of dishonesty. But once he attacks Jake Tapper,
that's the thing. Yeah. It's just like, that's the other thing that I learned is that the right media, right-wing media, by which I mean everybody to the right of like Jonah Goldberg, hates legacy media more than they hate Democrats. That was interesting to me. That's just a conclusion based on the fact that I generally think that I try not to take it personally. I think I'm just kind of like an avatar for legacy media. But the idea that the New York Post is willing to quote Hunter Biden, like concocting some story about me, like the New York Post is the anti-Hunter Biden publication in the world. I mean, that is their bread and butter in so many ways. And that was so interesting to me. But I think I think we're in a bad place. I mean, like as a country in terms of the media.
By the way, what you just said, that the right-wing media or anything to the right of the Dispatch hates the media more than the Democrats. This is a Steve Bannon thesis for a while. And you could say a lot about Steve Bannon, but he has a pretty good theory of the case when it comes to electoral success. Yeah.
It's like that old story about the members of the House, two Republicans are talking with each other and they refer to House Democrats as the opposition, but the Senate as the enemy. And it's just like, it's not really about party alliance. And whether it's Bannon or Trump or whatever, but I mean, I think Democrats are doing it too, to the media. But the idea that hating legacy media is more important than hating the people who are actually political opposition. And I find it surprising, really, honestly, but maybe I'm naive on this sort of stuff. I mean, I am old, so, I just came up in a different era where, like, I still sometimes think, like, what would Peter Jennings think about tweets? Like, how would, what would Peter Jennings think about, like, some of this other stuff?
So I do want to get to, and I'll do it this way. I'm going to quote a segment that Mark Halpern ran today, and I will actually cut through some of the bluster of the segment. He has a few outlets. This was on the program he has with the Megyn Kelly show, and it was titled "Tapper's New Biden Cover-Up Spin Blames Trump, NBC Autopen." Well, he takes a long time dissecting an interview you did with Hugh Hewitt. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to quote him and then do him a favor by stripping out the extraneous stuff and going to the nub of his critique, which is, I think, worth talking about. So this is what he says. The storyline of the book, your book, this press tour and the media narrative is that Tapper and Thompson uncovered the truth that Biden's decline began in 2023. And by the end of the year, a few hundred Democrats in private settings had seen it. So the story goes, they're guilty. The story goes of having witnessed something no one else saw, failing to speak out. And that's how we arrived at the debate. Oh, my goodness, what a surprise. The other part of their storyline, which again is a fiction, but one they've stuck to and has gained traction in many quarters, is that the reason the press didn't report what everyone in America could see isn't because they were biased against Trump, but because they didn't see it and there was no way to see it. So I want to take all that and the insults to you and just put it to you. The reason the press didn't report it, is it fair to say, or let's analyze this idea that one reason the press didn't report Biden's decline, and in some places they did, and your co-author was one of the best on this, but one reason the press didn't report it was because they were biased against Trump. You tell me, how fair to some extent is that?
The way you just, if that's what he said, that's not what we're saying. And that's not, that's a fictitious narrative. And it's not particularly like throwing up a straw man and beating it up is what people who don't have good arguments do. I will say this. There are a lot of reasons why this stuff didn't get covered the way it did. First of all, there were serious attempts to cover it. Peter Baker at the New York Times wrote a piece in 2022. Michael Shear of the New York Times wrote a piece. There were commentaries by all sorts of people. Now, this is not reporting, this is commentary, but there's a lot of commentary, not only on the right by the Hugh Hewitts of the world and Mary Catherine Ham and others, and maybe Mark was one of them, I have no idea. And then people, some like even on the center left, like David Ignatius or Bill Maher. But in terms of what people were able to uncover, facts, investigative journalism, there was not a ton. There was Alex did some great stuff for Axios starting in basically April 2023. Siobhan Hughes and Annie Linsky from the Wall Street Journal did some stuff in June 2024. They got attacked by Democrats, but they were onto something. It was a piece behind the scenes, Biden shows signs of slipping. And it was actually a groundbreaking piece in June 2024.
Behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping.
There you
June
go.
4th, 20 days before the debate. Yes.
And then there also was coverage after the Hur report about, what the Hur report was basically saying. Now, why wasn't there more? There's this conflation in this criticism that I think is easy to make, but not investigative reporting, which is commentary. People saying, I see Joe Biden out there and he's addled, he's infirm is the word that Hugh Hewitt used, and other people made those comments. And we all saw it, right? This was the stuff that was public. And this is the reason why so many people in polls, including Democrats by 2024, were saying he's too old to run for president. There's that, and I'm not belittling it at all. And then there is investigative reporting. And the investigative reporting on this is people who were not able to get as much as they wanted to get because sources were quiet. And the reason that sources were quiet was because it had been framed as if you share any of this with anyone, you are only helping Trump. And in fact, even Dean Phillips, who campaigned against Joe Biden because he thought he was too old to win, even he pulled his punches.
Oh, he always couched his message as there were so many stipulations before he even made his case about why we need something new. Joe Biden's amazing, and I'm not saying anything about Joe Biden, and the old dog still got it, but maybe give me a look. Yeah.
So this is not to excuse anything. If somebody wants to point me to an example of investigative journalism that made the case that this was happening to Joe Biden, not just from what was publicly available, but from what was going on behind the scenes that I have not referred to, I would be happy and delighted to credit it. I'm just saying that I think that was one of the reasons why there was as little as there was, and there should have been more. Now, then there's this other question. Does being anti-Trump or being pro-Biden or being pro-Kamala Harris play a role in any of that?
Yeah.
I can say for me, no, but I also don't speak for anybody else.
Right. I get that. But this is to channel what almost every conservative thinks. But also I'll tell you what I think, that bias does lead to blinders. And even though I know many, many people in the White House press corps who would have loved a scoop that really showed that Joe Biden was addled, there are many, many people within the organizations they work with, the culture of those organizations, the people that they socialize with, the audience of those news organizations that would have rebutted, would not have like that. And this all leads to, since we are social animals, you're driven to get a story, like maybe during the first Trump administration, there was a total drive and every incentive was for most members of the legacy media to break that story that showed that Donald Trump was connected with Russia. And that impulse just was not there with the Joe Biden story. And I'll tell you something else, which that after the very important stories, couple of them you talked about, were broken and should have led media organizations to say, oh, maybe there's something to this, like the Robert Hur story.
Right.
MSNBC, which isn't your network, and maybe you're loath to criticize them, but they're a mainstream network that symbolizes either mainstream media or the Democrats. They had so many stories. I'll read you one headline. Biden memory issues were a lie, probe transcripts and special counsel Robert Hur testimony shows. How do you get credibility back from that? I don't think MSNBC has even tried. And there was another one after that Annie Linsky and Siobhan Hughes story, behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping, which was true. Yeah. CNN's then media critic, which I think gives extra credence or weight to what I'm saying, Oliver Darcy wrote a story, Wall Street Journal story about Biden Biden's mental acuity suffers from glaring problems. They should never have printed the story, is what Darcy argued. So since all these people are affiliated with the legacy media or mainstream media, and they're spending all this time trying to rebut the truth, of course it's going to accrue to the discredit of legacy media, isn't
100%. Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you just said. I agree with it entirely. I mean, I disagreed with when Oliver wrote that. Look, Oliver is a very talented media writer and critic who now has a very popular newsletter. But I disagree.
Right, he's no longer with CNN. Yeah.
He's no longer with CNN. But I mean, that's not related. But like all of that is to say is Oliver was independent at CNN. He didn't ask me what I thought. And when I read that, I disagreed very, very strongly. And as soon as the debate was over, I had Annie and Siobhan on to talk about their piece, I think the next week, because obviously they had been proven correct. I did not belittle the Hur report because I believed Robert Hur. I thought that was credible. And I did not think that the Democratic pushback on it was believable. But I'm just one person. And again, and Alex and I have talked about this at length. I would never argue that knowing then what I know now, that I covered this the way that it deserved to be covered, because I did not know how bad it was behind the scenes. I wish I had been more aggressive. Alex, too, who broke stories, he and I have talked about this, like even though he had broken all this stuff, like about the fact that Biden's schedule was pretty much kept at 10 a.m. to 4 or 5 p.m., that once we started writing this book, once the election was over, the sword of Damocles was gone. There was no longer a threat of Trump. It was a reality of Trump. And people started actually talking to us. Once that happened, we couldn't believe how bad it was. Yeah. So I don't know. I get the critique that the media writ large did not do as good a job as we should have in a perfect world. What I'm wondering about is, point me to the example of investigative journalism that was done by people that, not legacy media, conservatives or whoever, or progressives or, whatever, that was being done that the legacy media was not paying attention to. That's all I'm saying. Like, there's a difference between commentary, and it's, again, I'm not belittling it all, but showing Joe Biden tripping on a stairwell and laughing at him, or calling him sippy cup, or saying his brain is turned to pea soup or whatever, like, fine. That's not investigative journalism. Right. I'm not criticizing it. It's just different. Where's the investigative journalism? And the argument that there wasn't an incentive structure for that investigative journalism is one that I've heard Alex make, and I don't disagree with it, but I just don't know of evidence of it being because of that incentive structure. We have a reporter in the book who had been hearing some of the same things that Annie and Siobhan had been hearing in May, and was working on a story about Biden showing signs of slipping. And Steve Ricchetti, who's a top Biden aide, basically says to this reporter, well, I was at all these meetings, and I will go, and basically suggests to this reporter, I'm going to go on the record and saying everything you're saying is not true. So just FYI. And like, that reporter backs off, doesn't have it. And even if you look at Annie and Siobhan's story, obviously they talked to Democrats, but there's not one House Democrat or congressional Democrat. There's not one Democratic source even quoted in the piece as a Democrat, because they were more cautious then in June 2024. I don't even know if we talked to the same people, but assuming we did, our version in our book of that Afghanistan meeting in January 2024 has more quotes from House Democrats or congressional Democrats or Democratic sources or whatever than theirs does. Not because we're better reporters, but because we did the story after the election was over. So I think that there is this lack of cooperation by Democrats that lets Democrats off the hook. And again, this does get me back to this idea of that people to the right of the Dispatch or National Review, well, somewhere in the, you'd have to pick among National Review staff, but somewhere to the right of the Dispatch, they are more.
Yes, Lowry, no, yeah.
They were more. They seem more invested in attacking legacy media than they are in attacking Democrats, which I'm not judging it. It's just curious to me, since obviously this was a cover-up conducted by Joe Biden and his family and his top aides.
This book is a lot of things, but it's an attempt at accountability, retroactively doing what you can as a newsman. But you've also had to think about exactly what Alex was saying about the incentive structure. When you think about that for yourself, you're in different positions. You're one of the lead anchors, if not the lead anchor, on CNN, and he's a very respected guy at Axios, but not in that position. So
he's a White House correspondent is what he is. Yes. He's a White House correspondent, but I can go back and remember what it was like being a White House correspondent for ABC News covering Obama. And yeah, the incentive structure was not to do stories about Obama. Now, but when Alex talks about it, he means it more in terms of the societal incentive structure than the editorial incentive structure. Like I broke stories about Obama for ABC News that weren't necessarily flattering stories for Obama. But there was never any editorial dissuasion from doing that. But certainly,
right. But culture is a potent thing.
Well, I mean, the Obama people would paint me as a right winger, and criticize me as a right winger. And for years, the Media Matters folks would attack me as a right winger, and over and over and over again, and like so. But that's just part and parcel of the incentive structures in journalism today, left, right, or center. I mean, like you're either going to piss off Newsbusters or you're going to piss off Media Matters. Like you just have to choose your poison on any given day.
When you think back to the coverage that you did and you do a self-analysis, do you see punches being pulled for any reasons? Or let me even ask you this, two-part question. When you mixed it up with Laura Trump about her assertion that Biden stuttered, and you've talked about this a lot in the book tour, and you flat out said you were wrong, to your credit, but did you get more positive feedback for that than the normal kind of hard-pressing interview you're known for?
No. And that was also, that was October 2020. And Biden was old and, showing his age, but there had been not any serious allegations of acuity issues that I'd seen. Obviously, he had been able to campaign from the comfort of his basement because of COVID to a large degree. No, I didn't get like kudos or hosannas or whatever. I mean, the thing about the Laura Trump thing that's interesting is she had made the comment. It had been covered on social media. It had been covered by the Daily Mail. It had been covered elsewhere. Sully, the pilot, had written an op-ed in the New York Times. I guess he had a stutter when he was younger, and criticizing her for attacking Joe Biden and his view for his stutter, for Biden's stutter. So when I raised that like months later in October, in the thick of the election, when Donald Trump Jr. is alleging Joe Biden's a pedophile on Instagram and all this other stuff, I really honestly didn't think much of it. I thought I was just saying what people like, what has been like kind of like established. Right. She denied it. And then after we researched the book and I realized, oh my God, like his addlement does go back all the way to 2015 and then 2017, 2018. She was right. I called her and that was that. But no, I wouldn't say that I get, and not internally anyway. I don't think anybody said anything to me about that. Now, look, it was 5 years ago. I don't remember.
Yeah. Is there, just as the Democratic Party, there are some small footsteps towards trying to reestablish credibility as to the questions we're talking about, either Biden specifically or just the fact that there is a gerontocracy within the party that's going on in political circles. But my question, once again, is media circles. Do you think that there is that effort among the media who didn't sufficiently expose this? Do you think that the media, CNN and the New York Times and Washington Post and the New Yorker and New York Magazine, we give us like the 20 outlets that kind of shape our opinion, non-specifically ideological media, have done enough soul searching, looking back, correction, and trying to reestablish credibility with their readers and listeners?
I mean, not that I know of, not that I can discern.
Should they? Can they?
I mean, it's a complicated issue. Of course, we all should. We all should. I mean, we all should try to be the best reporters we can be on any story, and when we fall short, admit it and figure out why we fell short. I think that the current incentives in media are very different than they were when I was coming up 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, whenever it was. And there is, I also worry about a whole new generation of reporters that, so there was such an effort after the WMD fiasco, and then again in 2016 after Trump was elected, for the media to learn the lesson that there aren't two sides to every story. There's truth and there's untruth or lies.
The phrase both sidesism became a pejorative, a shorthand for you're doing it wrong.
Right. And then that was weaponized by the left, by Democrats, to counter anyone trying to provide actual. There are two sides to stories. Like a tax debate, right?
Yeah.
There are two sides, or more than two, to debate over the Build Back Better, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It's not for the media to say this bill is evil. It is for the media to say this is what the bill does, and explore different ramifications there are. But both sidesism as a pejorative was weaponized against the media, and I fear there are some people who have. I saw an Instagram post. I'm going to keep this as benign, descriptive wise as possible. But I saw an Instagram post by a young reporter with a major news organization that was the most simplistic thing about an international conflict. But I fear that the next generation, and look, Gen Xers, I'm not saying that we're the best, but I fear the next generation, it might get even worse. This idea of are we searching for the truth, or are we searching for narratives that point our preconceived prejudices?
Are you sure there is a robust market for both sides reporting?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, I work for CNN, and that is our hope that's how people see us. I realize that people on the left see us as corporate media that are too pro-Trump or not tough enough, and people on the right see us as anti-Trump, blah, 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 activists. But I don't see CNN that way. I see a lot of reporters trying their hardest and trying their best to be fair, honest reporters without an ideological or partisan bias. Do we always succeed? No, but we try. Do I think that there is a market for it? Yes, because I am trying to thrive in a very difficult, competitive news media world right now. And I think that there is that, but it is obviously much more lucrative to preach to choirs. It is obviously much more lucrative. If you are a fan of Donald Trump, you know what channel you can turn on, or channels you can turn on, and not hear anything where, we're never heard a discouraging word. And if you hate Donald Trump and you love Joe Biden, and you don't want to hear a bad word about Joe Biden, and you only want to hear, you know where to go for that. And those are lucrative business models, but I don't know that they're not what we do or what we try to do anyway at CNN.
I think there is a market, but I'm 100% convinced it's a niche market. I don't know if it's 40% niche or 10% niche. I mean, CNN we've seen the figures. You guys make a lot of money, but you get less eyeballs on you on a given day, which is probably because, is there really news on a given day? Like new things happening all the time? Maybe, but is that what is actually being put on our television sets every day? Unclear. Narrative is, but this is my point. I used to be convinced that most people do want the news, and then there are people who want their ideology catered to. Now I think it's opposite. I think there's every evidence that it's opposite.
Well, I don't know that I agree with a bunch of things you just said, including I would argue anybody who wants to know whether there's news for 2 hours for my show every day should turn on at 5 p.m. Eastern, the lead with CNN, and we do 2 hours, and we try to have a robust discussion and reporting on any number of topics from all over the world to Washington, D.C. Beyond that, I think you might be right when it comes to news junkies. And the most informed people, that there is a partisan skew there. I think that you could make a case for that. I don't think that represents the public at large or even high information voters at large.
Right.
Who might.
But Jake, non-news junkies aren't watching cable news at 5 o'clock most afternoons without a disaster.
Unless there's a big breaking news story. And we do see things happen when there is an Iran strike or, and people do come to us and. Yeah,
CNN becomes the number one station. I think that's true in those instances, but only in those instances.
But is it not important?
Go ahead.
Well, is it not important to have a place like that where you can go and say, I just want to know what's going on in Iran. I don't want it filtered through this is great for Trump or this is horrible for Trump.
Absolutely. But I think it confirms my thesis that while there is enough actual news to fill a 2-hour show, if that's what you want to do, mostly what we call news is what's consumed by news junkies. And then I don't know if you've seen the studies on passive versus active news. So active news is people who say, I want the news and click on a station to CNN. That's the huge ask of them, or that's a huge task. Passive news is they sit back and they get in their feeds, which is not to say they're bad people or worse citizens. It's probably to say that they're younger, but the passive news consumption trends really, really fit in with my thesis that there's not a huge market for two sides unbiased news.
Which is why it is so important for not just CNN, but ABC News, CBS News, NBC News, PBS, NPR, whoever, to find ways to those citizens, to those consumers, and why it is so imperative upon us at CNN to have a presence on people's phones and on people's streaming TVs that allows the passive news consumers to get our content. But without the content, by which I mean the first draft of history being written by me or Maggie Haberman or Siobhan Hughes or Annie Linsky or Alex Thompson, et cetera, without that first draft, what are we going to have? What are we going to have? We're going to have people filtering news through partisan lenses and people who are ill-informed, TikToking away. And I just think what we do is really important to a thriving democracy. Not me, but the fact of somebody trying to record what is going on.
So the last question is, I know you're working on the paperback and new information will be in the paperback, but perhaps also it's a little bit like the experimenter affecting the experiment. What about aspects of everything we've been talking about, how the information itself was received the first time? Will that influence at all the presentation of the information, to not just to respond to critics, but maybe you figured out a way that, proper information can actually get through and have a chance to penetrate? So that's my question about this next draft of history you get a crack at.
So we have talked about the paperback only fleetingly, and we have written 2 or 3 editions, like minor anecdotes to insert. We have not sat down and had the big conversation with the editor about, do we do an afterword that includes the response to the book? Do we do an afterword that includes Joe Biden's cancer diagnosis, which was disclosed 2 days before we published? Do we do, like, what do we do? How do we cover the media more? I mean, as you know, because we told you at the Seattle event, one of the things that we had going for us that was both a help and a hindrance was because of the rapidly sped up production schedule for the book. Handing in a first draft at the end of January, having it on the shelves in May, we were limited to 85,000 words. And that, the first draft we handed in was like 115,000. And the editor was like, break out the scythe, because you need to cut tens of thousands of words out. And so there were things in there that we either trimmed or eliminated entirely. Some of the media coverage fit that description, because honestly, the people who are most interested in that are people like you and me, but not like John Q. Public or Jane Q. Public, who are more interested in what happened, and not, the war between Fox and MSNBC or whatever. So I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. I know what we want, that we want to add some reporting about, other moments where he didn't recognize people that he should have recognized, or stories like that. But other than that, I don't know. It might be a little meta. And I honestly have to say, like, I've never had an 85,000 word limit to a book before, and I found it an immense gift. It made the book so much leaner. It made it eminently more readable. And it's like, and I have been begging as an author for an editor who will chop my stuff down. This came pre-chopped. So, I mean, I don't know what you're like when you write, but like, I feel like I need editors when I write a long form. I really need editors. And, I wrote a book about Afghanistan that was in like 500 pages or something. And like, I'm really proud of it, but, would like 100,000 people more have read it if it was half the length,
Yeah. So I said last question, but because of what you do, what's a story in the news we're not paying attention to? Could have nothing to do with this. That's really interesting to you.
I wouldn't say we're not paying enough attention to it, but I think the Epstein files stuff is just fascinating. And
in terms of fallout for the administration, or facts?
No, just in the fact that like there remains all this documentation out there that can be released that people don't want released. And we're seeing it in real time on the biggest scale ever. Like, people are wondering, like, if you go back, I recommend Julie K. Brown's book, Perversion of Justice, the Jeffrey Epstein story. She's the Miami Herald reporter that broke so much on this. And like, you go back to his arrest or whatever happened to him in 2005, and the police pull up, and all they have is like a sleazy millionaire in his early 50s paying a bunch of young, vulnerable, underage girls for sex, raping. I don't mean all they have, but I just mean it wasn't like a grand conspiracy involving lots of people. It was one guy. And the police walk in, and they obviously knew that they were coming. The computers have been ripped from the wall. Yeah, the Epstein
people knew.
Yeah, because somebody at the state's attorney's office probably tipped them off. And from that moment until this moment right now, the fix is in. And I just find it fascinating. You don't have to think. I mean, there's a lot of complications and interesting details about the story, but like, you are seeing a real, actual conspiracy playing out in real time in front of all of our eyes. And you are seeing people who previously were the ones pointing it out now completely compromised and part of the problem. And it's fascinating. And like, you don't see something like this every day. This is like, if you wrote this for a movie, people would be like, it's too on the nose. Really? Kash Patel and Don Bongino at the FBI, and they are now part of it? Come on. So I find it, and also like there's this true story of injustice. These young women, some of them underage, some of them not, were truly, screwed by the system in a horrible way, by the local authorities, by the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the Bush Justice Department, and now again today.
Jake Tapper covers it all on The Lead with Jake Tapper, 5 to 7 Eastern Time on CNN. And he, along with Alex Thompson, wrote Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. He's also on a book tour that will extend through the rest of the millennium. Thank you so much, Jake.
Thank you.